Please go ahead. We are live.
Good evening, friends. Welcome to the 58th webinar of the PG Track program from Delhi CSI. Today, we are going to talk about the continuous murmur. We already had one of the talks earlier, much later, earlier, but today we are going to hear a very different perspective from Dr. Suday Kumar. It's such a pleasure. I request Dr. Sumo to please welcome sir with his greetings, and then we are up to a very great session. And also, I would like to say that from next week, we are starting the case presentation. So we'll be having the panel of our examiners who will be examining the case presenter. So it will be a great exercise. I request you all to be joining live on that particular panel. And also, if you have any questions, clarifications, and particular comments, please feel free to write to us on our email pgtrackcsidelibranch@gmail.com. And you can, if you have missed any videos, please subscribe to the channel PG Track CSI Delhi Branch on YouTube, where all videos are available for download, for revision, and for revisiting all the lectures. So over to you, Dr. Sumo, please.
Yeah, good evening and welcome to the PG Track program. And it is once again our great privilege to have Suday Kumar sir with us. The reason why we are having multiple sessions with sir is that we are all so fascinated with the teaching skills of sir, how he makes every topic so interesting and so engaging. So we are looking forward to another very engaging session with sir. So sir, please come and take this session on continuous murmurs. Welcome, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the nice words. And it's a pleasure to discuss with all of you. It's an interactive session. I hope it can be like the previous one where the students can interact in between.
So unfortunately, today we don't have students also.
Okay.
So
fine, that's fine. Okay. Now, also, I think from next time, when case presentation, they may be interested. They think that this continuous murmur, they are already heard. That may be the reason why they are not very keen. Anyway, I'll just discuss that whatever I can. Now, the first question that is asked, and invariably that is asked, and the students fumble also. What is the definition of a continuous murmur? So it should start in systole, that's all. Need not occupy the whole of systole. But once it has started, the most important is it should go uninterrupted. That is the same murmur through the second sound into diastole. It need not occupy the whole of systole. It need not occupy the whole of diastole. So it can start anywhere in systole. But once it started, it should go uninterrupted through the second sound. That is the most important thing for continuous murmur. And that's what the examiner wants. Now, this is something which is very important when we present the case, the timing of the murmurs, the nomenclature. Systolic, diastolic, and continuous. That's simple. Then the systolic, there are 4 types based on the timing. The timing is more important. But what we are looking at is the timing and not the real mechanism when you are auscultating. Mechanism we contemplate after discussion, analyzing the whole thing. The murmur starts with the first sound but ends well before the second sound, that is early systolic. If the murmur starts after the second sound and then it ends before the starts after the first sound and ends before the second sound, we call it as mid systolic. If the murmur starts later in systolic after the first sound, goes up to the second sound, that is late systolic, and pansystolic is simple. Now, the confusion is about mid-systolic versus ejection systolic. All ejection systolic murmurs are mid-systolic, but all mid-systolic murmurs are not due to ejection. When you say ejection, it conveys the mechanism and the site of origin also. That is, it is related to the ejection of the blood from the ventricle through the outflow tract. So, it implies an outflow tract murmur. That we make it whether it is a mid-systolic ejection or non-ejection, depending on so many other things. That is why it is better use the term a mid-systolic murmur when we are presenting the case. And when asked, you can say it is an ejection type of mid-systolic murmur. The early diastolic murmur similarly start with the second sound and ends before the first sound. Mid-systolic start later and ends before the first sound. And the pre-systolic or late diastolic starts later, goes up to S1. Just like these three, it is early diastolic, mid diastolic. Early systolic It can be, it start with S1, so it start with isometric contraction. So you should know which are the things which can start with isometric contraction of the ventricle, that is the AV valve regurgitations and the ventricular subdefect murmurs. Mid-systolic can be from any site. Late systolic also, classically if it is late, because ejection starts quite early. Late usually classically is described with a mitral regurgitation of non-traumatic etiology, maybe mitral collapse or things like that. Continuous, I have already mentioned. The usual question that is asked in the examination is, you get a systolic murmur and a diastolic murmur, and it may be difficult to identify the second sound, or and it is difficult. Many times it is difficult to say whether it is a continuous murmur or a to and fro murmur. The continuous murmur, as we have discussed, it starts, goes uninterrupted through the second sound into diastolic. Whereas these are two separate murmurs. One, it will not be continuous in amplitude, character. Two, three things. One, the amplitude as such. Second, the character. These two components have different characters. Whereas in continuous, both the systolic and diastolic component has same character. That is because the continuous murmur is due to flow at a site in the same direction. For example, if it is PDA from the aorta to PA always, if it is continuous murmur. So whatever is the situation, the flow is in the same direction across the same site in continuous, whereas in to and from murmur, they are dissociated. Example AS, the flow is towards the aorta, EDM is away from the aortic valve. VSD with AR, the VSD flow is from left to right in systole and AR is different. So that is a basic difference as far as the mechanism is concerned. So this is the, if you want to hear, the postgraduates or the student want to hear the sounds, it's a better go to the echo lab, put the Doppler, and the Doppler noise corresponds to the murmur. Whatever murmur you are hearing, if you have time with the electrocardiogram, you can see that, or time with the carotids or whatever it is, you can see that the Doppler noise corresponds to the murmur. And this is the murmur which starts in systole, goes uninterrupted through the second sound into the diastole. And usually classical ductus murmur peaks around the second sound. And the Doppler signal also you can see that it is peaking around the second sound towards the end of systole. The real mechanism, I'm not sure. I don't know. I'll be take help from our colleagues, Dr. Mohit, Dr. Girish, Dr. Sumot, whether they will be able to explain why it peaks around second sound. Now the to and from murmur is very clear. The AR jet, which is in this direction, and aortic stenosis jet is in the opposite direction. There is a basis. Whereas in the previous one, you will see that the continuous spectral pattern is in the same direction. The flow is in the same direction. Whereas in a to and from murmur, it is in this, it is discordant direction. So you have the AR jet in this direction and aortic stenosis jet in that direction. Correspondingly, you have this murmur. The timing is different, the quality is different, and the amplitude is not constant. VSD are the same thing. The VSD pansystolic murmur, which is relatively harsh, and a soft decrescendo early diastolic murmur. This is pansystolic or hollow systolic with the same intensity, and this is the decrescendo. The quality is entirely different. Now coming to the mechanisms of continuous murmur. So continuous murmur occurs when there is a flow from a high to low pressure area. That is our usual thing which we know, the usual pathological and different diagnoses which come to our examination of the cardiac cases or cardiovascular problems, organic. We talk about the flow occurring from a high pressure to a low pressure, classically is PDA, simple thing. Then if there is an enhanced flow, that also, because murmur is related to turbulence. Turbulence is related to flow, proportionate, and to the square root of gradient only. So majority of the times we think that the intensity of the murmur is related to the gradient as such. More important than the gradient is the flow. So it is directly, the intensity of a murmur is directly proportional to the flow and proportional to only the square root of the gradient. Flow is the most important. So whenever there is a rapid flow or an excessive rapid flow, hyperdynamic, it can produce a continuous murmur in the artery as well as in the veins. Then if there is a narrowing to the flow has to occur continuously. So it can produce obstruction either in the artery or vein it can. So if you look at this, the mechanisms could be arterial, that is arterial stenosis or increased flow, or venous, the same thing, or high to pressure shunts, that is from a high arterial pressure to a low arterial, that is arterioarterial. Obviously arteriovenous, high to low pressure, arteriocameral, from the artery to the cardiac chamber, or camerocameral, that is from the cardiac chamber to another cardiac chamber. That's a rare situation. This is the way you can, based on the site of origin of the murmur plus the mechanism, it could be arterial, venous, these two things, or high to pressure zones could be from arterioarterial, arteriovenous, arteriocameral, camerocameral. All the proximal four are high pressure and these four are low pressure zones. Now we come back to each one. Arterial is, mammary shuffle, the breast in pregnancy, because of the tremendous flow to the breast. Okay, then toxic goiter. If you auscultate the thyroid, you will get a continuous murmur there. Any hemangiomas, you will get a murmur. Neoplasm, especially hepatoma, which is highly vascular, you can have continuous murmur over the hypochondrium. The venous, physiologically, is the enhanced venous flow through the superior vena cava seen at the root of the neck, classically in children. Then that is the physiological. Or this is the one which our postgraduates should know, TAPVC. I will discuss that a little later. And this is one of the clue for cranial AV fistulas. Cranial arteriovenous fistulas we are likely to miss. But that arteriovenous fistula will enhance the cranial venous flow. It can reduce the venous hum. So these are that's the important thing is for us. These are two things which are important as far as the cardiologists are concerned. Obstruction to arteries, at the site of coarctation, you can get continuous murmur, or at the site of obstruction to any systemic artery, including coronary artery, you can have continuous murmur. Then pulmonary arterial stenosis, you can have continuous murmur, especially when there is an associated left-right shunt, because there is stenosis plus increased flow. So for example, ASD with pulmonary arterial stenosis, you can get continuous murmur because the flow is increased and across an arrow there is some gradient also. Venous is the obstructed vertical vein in supracardiac TAPVC. So this is a supracardiac TAPVC, the four pulmonary veins draining to the common pulmonary vein, drained by the vertical vein to the left innominate vein. The innominate vein flow increases, the superior vena cava flow increases to the right heart. And there can be obstruction here between contributed mainly by the bronchus, and that can produce an obstruction and it can produce a continuous murmur. If you ask me whether I have heard that, no. Have I documented that? In Doppler, I have seen. In pediatric, in units, one of the case where I was doing the echocardiogram, a TAPVC was being entertained, but the first clue was when I was putting the Doppler, interrogating from the suprasonal view, I could get a continuous low velocity signal coming in the positive direction. And that was the first clue for supracardiac TAPVC, which was relatively partially obstructed. And this occurs, okay? And I said that venous arm. So the flow to the superior vena cava comes from the right innominate vein plus the normal venous return plus the whole pulmonary venous return. And one of the things which I will be discussing a little later is the mechanism. What happened to venous arm is if you press the jugular vein, you press the jugular vein, normally the venous arm disappears. Whereas if you press the jugular vein, the venous arm may persist in TAPVC, especially if it is non-obstructed. So if after compressing the jugular vein, the venous arm is persisting, suspect TAPVC. Okay. Now the high pressure to low pressure, we have four things. I have discussed arterial, I have discussed venous, arterioarterial, arteriovenous, arteriocameral, and camerocameral. Arterioarterial is common. There should be a communication between a high pressure artery to a low pressure artery, which normally is the systemic artery to the pulmonary artery connection. Classically, it is PDA. AP window less common because of severe pH. Aortopulmonary collaterals. Then shunts in cyanotic conjunctivitis is the low flow group. Classically is Blalock Taussig shunt. Then anomalous origin of the left coronary or right coronary artery from the pulmonary artery. L-kappa is more common. Coronary artery fistula. Don't use the term coronary artery or venous fistula. because it can drain to chambers also. So coronary artery fistula can have the same phenomenon, and ruptured sinus of Valsalva to pulmonary artery can produce a continuous murmur. Then the continuous murmur could be a systemic collateral occurring in coarctation. And the last one of the classes I have discussed the collaterals, and you have to auscultate the chest and the back for a continuous murmur of the collaterals between the posterior intercostal arteries. That is the posterior intercostal artery receiving the blood from anterior intercostal. So the collaterals over the chest in coarctation, either in the back, similar to the Sussman sign, or around the scapula, around the shoulder due to periscapular collaterals. Or it may be in the anterior abdominal wall, the communication between the superior thoracic artery versus the inferior thoracic artery, internal mammary artery versus the inferior epigastric artery. Okay, that can have continuous murmur. These are all rare situations, but coarctation you have to look for. You look for Sussman signs, patients stooping forward. Arteriovenous is simple. It could be native or iatrogenic in creating AV fistulas for dialysis. Native could be in the systemic artery, systemic AV fistulas, coronary arteriovenous fistulas, and pulmonary AV fistulas. Then from the artery to a cardiac chamber, classically it is the ruptured sinus of Valsalva into commonly right ventricle, or less commonly to right atrium, and rarely to left heart. And coronary artery fistula to the right atrium. It's an arteriocameral. One of the common sites for drainage of the coronary artery fistula is to the right atrium. Then camerocameral is rare. I have seen two cases. There is a restrictive ASD. There is a restrictive ASD with a high LA pressure. So there is a foramen ovale which is stretched open, or a small ASD, but the LA pressure is high because of an LV inflow obstruction, like microstenosis. Or post-PTMC, you created a small ASD and there was a residual microstenosis or a restenosis, so that the LA pressure is remaining high. Rare, but for completion's sake, I have discussed that. Now, what is your approach? There is a second part, was approach to continuous murmur. Most important is this, the basic clinical evaluation. Your diagnosis based on continuous murmur is important in certain clinical situations. We are not going to diagnose based on that continuous murmur, because auscultation is the final aspect of clinical examination. And I think I am I'm concentrated more on clinical cardiology. My 70%, 80% of my diagnosis, clinical diagnosis, is before auscultation. Because we have to make a rough differential diagnosis from history and physical findings up to auscultation. And then you fine tune your auscultation to sort out the diagnosis. And if you go for diagnosis based on straightaway auscultation, 90% of the times you'll be wrong. Then specific analysis of the murmur. That is, make sure that the murmur is continuous. That is the number one thing. It requires clinical skill. Second, is it localized to one area or widely transmitted? It is heard all over or over a larger area. Site of maximum intensity, where is it best heard? Then what is the character? It has a special character. For example, the PDA, the machinery murmur because of the associated multiple clicks, like that. Or the RSOV, where is a very harsh murmur, or a very soft murmur like the murmur of coronary artery fistula, or L kappa, or bronchopulmonary collaterals, or venous. These are all soft humming murmurs. Then dynamic auscultation is not that important, but is it is important for the postgraduate examination. But most important is the corroborative findings. For example, a cyanotic heart disease, if you get a continuous murmur, you think for aorta pulmonary collaterals or pulmonary AV fistula, in which case the clinical diagnosis of cyanotic heart disease, pulmonary atresia, is not that difficult. Cyanosis, but normal heart, suspect a pulmonary AV fistula. Okay, so that background is very important in making the diagnosis. Okay, a child with heart failure and continuous murmur, we know the diagnosis. So that's the most important thing, but we'll concentrate on the site. Which are the continuous murmurs which are better heard in the second left ventricular space or pulmonary area? Classically, it is PDA, following the Blalock-Taussig shunt, either the classical or the modified Blalock-Taussig shunt. Coronary artery fistula draining to the pulmonary artery. So the continuous murmur is in the pulmonary artery. Similarly, the L-kappa I'll discuss in detail for some beginners who may not be very familiar, because I have been discussing with many postgraduates. Many of them are not sure what is the hemodynamics and why continuous murmur, what is the flow pattern in L-kappa. Now, ruptured sinus of L vessel, rarely it can rupture to the pulmonary artery. Okay, that is the site. Left sternal edge, third, fourth space, fifth space. When it comes, you think of a rupture to the RVOT or RV body. RVOT is something like, it is extremely difficult because RSOV, the murmur is something like grade 5 or 6. So it may not be easy to say that it is best heard in the second space, third space, or fourth space. But that is one way. If we can have a differentiation in the intensity, this will be heard a little lower down. On the right side, if it is harsh, it is RSOV. If it is soft, it could be coronary artery fistula to the right atrium, or the rare situation of PFO with mitral stenosis. If you are hearing continuous murmur in the lung fields, I'm not talking about the chest wall, you are sure it is in the lung fields, that it is most likely epicollaterals. Because pulmonary AV fistula, the murmur, because these are quite deep, the pressure gradient is low, from a systolic pressure of 20 to a pulmonary venous pressure of around 8 or 10. The gradient is only 10 and the flow is not that tremendous. So the pulmonary AV fistula murmur is usually soft, it is faint. So we are likely to miss, unless there are multiple pulmonary AV fistulas which are quite peripheral, in the peripheral location. Many times it will be relatively central. So then pulmonary artery stenosis, especially with left right shunt, as I've told, the AIS due to pulmonary artery stenosis, the murmur will be loud because there are two components, the flow plus the stenosis gradient. If you are hearing it over the chest wall, first, is it from the lungs, AP collaterals? If not, cohort collateral. So obviously, you have made the diagnosis before coming to auscultation for continuous murmur. Cohort diagnosis, as we said, usually miss because unless you concentrate on the femorals, you are likely to miss that. So if you have diagnosed cohort, cohort is a diagnosis based on pulse examination. Then if you get a continuous murmur, it is cohort collaterals. Whereas cyanotic with continuous murmur, it is AP collaterals. If the root of the neck, venous sum. And if it is extrathoracic, systemic AV fistulas. Dynamic auscultation is not that important because almost always in majority of the situations, the continuous murmur is from a high pressure to a low pressure, either because of the shunt or because of the obstruction. So it is from the high pressure to the low pressure, except in one situation where the murmur accentuates during Muller's maneuver. I would have been happy if the postgraduate there, because I wanted to ask a question on this thing, which I think our three colleagues, Sumot sir, Mohit sir, and Giri sir, they can discuss with their colleagues how this Muller's maneuver accentuates the pulmonary fistula. What is the hemodynamics of that? But that they have to concentrate. Are there any postgraduates with us? Otherwise, okay. Okay. Now, there the important thing which I want to teach them, which they may not be familiar, because Muller's maneuver only very few people have heard. That is, taking a deep inspiration against a closed glottis, it produces a marked reduction in the intrathoracic pressure. So the vena cava are extrathoracic, so that the cavo atrial gradient increases, the flow to the right heart increases, the pulmonary artery flow increases tremendously. Whereas the pulmonary vein is intrathoracic, so that during the fall in the intrathoracic pressure, the pulmonary venous pressure falls. So the gradient from the pulmonary artery to the pulmonary vein increases tremendously. And that's one thing which they have to do when they are doing angiogram, which is seldom done nowadays. Venous sum increases on standing because of the increase in the gravitational force. If you slightly stretch the neck to the opposite side, produce a partial narrowing, a little compression of the vena cava, so the murmur accentuates. But if you obliterate that, apply pressure to the jugular vein, it disappears, unless there is supracardiac TAPPs. Now, the question will be, which are the murmurs which can augment in diastole? It is ruptured sinus of Valsalva to the outflow tract. When it comes to the outflow tract, during systole, it is going through the infundibulum or through the myocardium. So during systole, the fistulous tract will be skewed. So the flow will be less, the murmur will be less. And diastole, the muscle relaxed, the flow will be tremendous. Coronary artery stenosis, I have not heard left anti-descending stenosis because it is very close anteriorly, and it produces a narrowing because all of us know that the coronary flow is predominantly in diastole. You may get a continuous murmur which is predominantly in diastole or augment in diastole. I have not heard so far. I don't know about the experience of my colleagues. This is venosum. I have described. There is increases on standing, stretching to the opposite side, and occluding. Usually benign, common in hyperdynamic circulatory state, children, anemia, etc. And that's a clue for cranial AV fistula. Nothing, but you are getting this thing. You go for look for cranial AV fistula. You cannot, but you look for AV fistulas elsewhere. Telangiectasias, Rendu-Barosler syndrome. Like that, you look for that. Patient coming with hematemesis because of AV fistulas. Okay. Or cirrhotic patients, they can have AV fistulas anywhere. Then the other thing I have mentioned. Now coming back to the clinical scenario, this is so simple. The PDA, the systolic and diastolic pressures in a large PDA, unless they develop severe Eisenmenger, both systole and diastole, there is a gradient, it produces the continuous murmur. A large PDA will have a high volume pulse because this just acts like it's an aortic runoff. Instead of the aortic runoff to the left ventricle in AR, this is an aortic runoff to the pulmonary artery. The volume of runoff is likely to be more because it occurs both in systole and diastole. So you can have a left ventricular volume overload, a child with an LV apex and high volume pulse. Look at the femoral. If the femoral is also high volume, it is PDA. If the femoral is low volume, it is coarctation. So that two diagnosis so simple. Then it is best obviously in the second space, the typical quality peaks around second zone and the multiple clicks. This I think all of you know, I need not elaborate. AP window, though it is physiologically similar to PDA, except for the anatomical location, this is usually large and usually there will be severe PAH because the aortic pressure is straight transmitted to the main pulmonary artery that cannot be dampened, and hence it will not have a classical continuous murmur. Occasionally you may get. I have not heard, but my experience in pediatric cardiology, especially in infants, is not that great. The shunts, you know, I brought in this because for postgraduates, except for the postgraduates in pediatric cardiology, they may not be familiar with all the shunts. The original was cutting the subclavian and an end to side anastomosis. It is ligated after the vertebral artery so that they will not have vertebral steal phenomenon. Okay, so that is a classical, whereas because it is an end to side, there could be some problem to blood flow to the left arm. So now it is a modified, that is an side to side using a Gore-Tex graft or a synthetic material. That part we stop at that level, but some examiners may ask, what else? If the shunt is created between the ascending aorta to the right pulmonary artery, because anatomically the right pulmonary artery goes just behind the tubular aorta. So that is a Butterstone shunt, and the left pulmonary artery goes posteriorly. It is closer to a spine, so you can create an anastomosis between the descending thoracic aorta and the left pulmonary artery. That is a portion. There is one more thing. There is a Davidson shunt. Now these two shunts are not popular because this created a large shunt with transmission of pressures resulting in PAH. So now the aorta pulmonary shunt, only thing which we are doing is the modified Blalock-Taussig shunt. That too is less common compared to the previous experiences. This is the Alcapa, which for some of the postgraduates, it may be very important. Here the left coronary artery is arising from the pulmonary artery. They present with heart failure in the early infancy, mitral regurgitation, or if they survive that, they develop myocardial ischemia, they come with a severe LV dysfunction with an infarction pattern. Okay, maybe a little later. So I asked, what is the cause for this? And quite often I got the answer that the desaturated blood from the pulmonary artery is going, so the myocardium is getting desaturated blood. That may be the reason. It is not. Now you look at the left coronary artery is arising from the pulmonary artery, which has a pressure of something like 30-20. So the left coronary artery pressure is low, whereas the right coronary artery is arising from the aorta. So the right coronary artery pressure is 120/80. And we know that there are collaterals. You are doing angiogram. Even following the first episode of myocardial infarction, when you are taking for primary angiography, angioplasty, you find a sizable number of them have good collaterals. And in chronic obstructive coronary disease, invariably, if one vessel is diseased, if the other vessel is normal, you have seen, suppose there is RCA occlusion, let us say chronic. You have found that you do the LAD injection, you find left coronary injection, you find good collaterals between mainly by the septal perforators and all the other branches. So a stimulus for collateral formation is absence of native flow or marked reduction in the native flow. More important than the pressure is the flow. If there is a native flow in the normal direction, chance of development of collaterals is less. Here, what happens is the flow may not be there, but there is a big pressure difference from birth. Okay, not in utero, because in utero the pressures are the same. The pressures are same in utero. So following the first breath, there is a significant fall in the PA pressure to near infant's level or child level by second week. So now the collaterals develop. So the flow is from the aorta through the right coronary artery, through the collaterals, through the left coronary artery, retrogradely to the pulmonary artery, and you can get a continuous flow or murmur at the proximal part of the main pulmonary artery. In anomalous right collagen, it will be the other way. Okay, so that is the way you look at how to pick it up in Doppler echo. You should have a suspicion. Any infant coming with heart failure with LV dysfunction, you can easily rule out VSD PDA, you can rule out LVOT obstruction. You are likely to say it is a myocardial disease. There are different causes, but in such case, the infarction pattern may not be there. What you have to do is interrogate the proximal pulmonary artery. You get the continuous flow, which will not be that turbulent as in a PDA. This we are likely to miss, but the first clue is in Alcapa, the right coronary artery will be markedly dilated. If you get a dilated right coronary or left coronary artery, in whichever situation, if you get a dilated right coronary artery in a patient, in an infant coming with heart failure, that is the clue. The other situations are coronary artery fistulas. You can have the same thing. You can have in children with that artery that is not Takayasu. What is that? The mucocutaneous Kawasaki disease. Kawasaki disease. Okay. Fine. Next, you should know that's about the examination. You should know about PDA, which is simple but is likely to be kept. Second is Alcapa. Many times it is an angiographic diagnosis which is given. You will be given angiogram, Alcapa, but they will ask you about the hemodynamics. Okay. Now the next case which is kept for examination, which you are likely to see, is ruptured sinus of Valsalva. So this is the cross-sectional view. The cross-sectional view in the RV outflow region, the right atrium, right ventricle outflow tract, pulmonary artery, you have the three sinuses, the right coronary sinus, left coronary sinus. Obviously, this is left non-coronary sinus, which is posterior. You can see the anatomical relation. That is, the right coronary cusp or sinus is in close proximity to the RV. This region, that is the left part of the right coronary sinus, is close to the RVOT and the pulmonary artery. The real anterior part is anterior, that is just facing us is to the body, and the right lower part is facing the tricuspid annular region, that is the inflow region here. The non-coronary cusp is predominantly or mainly in relation to the right atrium. A small part to the left atrium. Left coronary sinus is related to the left atrium. This is 60 to 70% is right coronary sinus Valsalva. 20%, 30% is this is less than 10%. So commonly it is right coronary artery, coronary sinus aneurysm. So it can rupture either to the RV outflow tract or rarely to the pulmonary artery, commonly to the RV body, less commonly to the RV inflow tricuspid valve annulus region, non-coronary cusp usually to the right atrium. This is very important for examination. In echocardiogram, you want to identify, this is extremely important in practice also. Now, how will you differentiate? This is the one which is coming from the right coronary sinus to the RVOT. This is the pulmonary valve. Whereas this is the one which is coming from the right coronary sinus to the right atrium. So here it is fused in systole so that the systolic component will be less. and it relaxes in diastole, so you get a continuous murmur in diastole. So even though it is continuous, this is the situation where you have the diastolic augmentation. This is diastole in the electrocardiogram. During systole, the track is fused, so you get systolic attenuation of the murmur. Whereas here it will be classical, especially when it ruptures in the right atrium. It's a rough, loud, continuous murmur. The difference is invariably this patient has heart failure with markedly elevated JVP, hepatomegaly, all those things. Okay. Then the presentation of RSOV depends on that is an acute rupture or a chronic leak. Even though it is said to be a congenital anomaly, the manifestation will be usually in the second or third decade. And it may gradually leak. But many times what happens is a gradual leak may abruptly increase because of hemodynamic factors like acute increase in dark fluid or secondary to infection, things like that. And basically it is depending on the level of the obstruction, your clinical findings may vary, whether it is a pre-tricuspid or a post-tricuspid. This is pre-tricuspid, this is post-tricuspid. Okay, based on that, just like any pre-tricuspid shunt. Now, we have RSOV, there is a great association, roughly 30 to 40% or even up to 50% can have in VSD, which is likely to be missed because clinically the murmur of the RSOV dominates, and you do the color Doppler, the color, you're taken away by that color and it masks a VSD flow also. Around 10%, 15% can have associated AR also because the aneurysm is bulging. The aorta is not normal. The annulus is not normal. When bulges, it can push the right coronary cusp. So there can be aortic regurgitation also by multiple mechanisms, anatomical and physiological. Now, coronary artery fistula to the right atrium seldom produces a murmur. The murmur, they remain relatively asymptomatic, or they may, because only it goes to certain branches are free. It is not that the whole artery goes into fistulous tract. It may be a right ventricular branch or an RV branch, or a branch goes, so that the large portion of the myocardium may be preserved, so that they may remain asymptomatic, or later they may present with effort angina. The murmur, as I've told earlier, is relatively soft. Best heard in the right sternal border because the right atrium on the right side of the sternum, midline, right side of the midline. So the murmur will be heard on the right side. And the clue is a dilated right coronary artery. The continuous flow in the right atrium may not be easy to pick up, but you have to look for that. Now coming to the aortopulmonary collaterals. You know, aortopulmonary collaterals always occurs when the pulmonary flow is extremely low, extremely low. Classically in pulmonary atresia, the straightaway pulmonary atresia with VSD, or pulmonary atresia with intact IVS, or pulmonary atresia as a part of any other complex abnormality. Basic physiology is the pulmonary blood flow for oxygenation is very low. So for the child to survive, oxygenation has to take place, blood has to reach the lungs. So it is mainly by a PDA or aortopulmonary collaterals or man-made shunts. Now you know about those things. Basic finding of the cyanotic heart disease plus continuous murmur, all those things you have picked up. So you get this clinical situation. You have a cyanotic heart disease. Always we talk monotonous discussion. Is it a high flow group or a low flow group? If you get continuous murmur in the lung field, you can for practical purpose take it as low flow group. Because a continuous murmur, either it is PDA or AP collateral, is because the pulmonary blood flow is low. Okay, there are three types of aortopulmonary collaterals, A, B, C. A is the collateral goes and connect to the central pulmonary artery. So there will be flow to both the pulmonary arteries equally. So you can find, it may not be equal, but there will be flow to both the pulmonary arteries. If it is getting connected more to right pulmonary artery more, because of the pressure and the direction, the flow may be more towards the right side, but it will fill the left pulmonary artery also. If the single collateral is supplying both the pulmonary artery, most likely it is to the main pulmonary artery or the proximal RP or LP. This is the type B when it goes to a lobar pulmonary artery. So you find that the collateral, this is descending aorta, gone through the collateral and injected into the collateral, it is supplying a lobe only. So this is the type B. Type C is this collateral has no connection with the native pulmonary artery. They go straight to the lungs. So they go straight to the lungs feed the lungs, the capillaries are drained by the pulmonary veins. So these are the three types. I thought I will discuss this because this is the additional thing you can tell, because other things are very simple. Aorta pulmonary collaterals, cyanoid canal disease, low pulmonary blood flow, most likely pulmonary atresia, can occur in severe tetralogy also, severe obstruction also, but classically in pulmonary atresia. Then they will ask you what is the types of pulmonary AP collaterals. Then the next question, if you have cleared that, almost you are through, they will ask you about unifocalization. Now, pulmonary AV fistula is extremely rare to diagnose clinically. You can see the right lower lobe pulmonary artery getting drained into an AV fistulous tract. You can see that, and you can see that CT, the pulmonary artery, the right pulmonary artery. Why do you say this is right pulmonary artery and this is left pulmonary artery? Left pulmonary artery has a higher take-up and it goes quite posteriorly. So left pulmonary artery has a higher take-up compared to the right pulmonary artery. And left pulmonary artery is curved like this. It is a U like this because it takes and goes down. Whereas the right pulmonary artery takes a horizontal course, then only it divides. So there are two things. The one, this is at a lower level, this is horizontal. This is at a higher level, it takes a U-turn. So this is the right pulmonary artery because this reconstruction, different views they are taking. The right pulmonary artery, the lower lobe pulmonary artery going to a fistulous tract drained by the pulmonary vein. The murmur is soft, seldom heard. It is localized if it is a single, or if it is multiple like this, it could be extensive, unilateral or bilateral. Many times it will be multiple, but what you pick up is a single major one by angiogram. There will be multiple smalls elsewhere. Okay, this is a murmur which can increase with Muller's maneuver. And the diagnosis is, we have found apparently normal heart. Everything is normal, but the patient is cyanosed. Rule out abnormal hemoglobins. Then pulmonary AV fistula, or something like anomalous systemic venous drainage to the left heart, or isolated deroofing of the coronary sinus. Okay, these are situations where you get an apparently normal heart. Everything looks normal. You are surprised. This is the rare thing which I have said, epigastric view, left atrium, right atrium, a small in-vitro communication. There was mitral stenosis. So the LA pressure was high, the RA pressure is low, and the blood flows from the left atrium to right atrium. The gradient is not that great because even with severe mitral stenosis, the pressure in the left atrium may be 20 or 25. Here it is around 5 to 10. So the gradient is only 10 to 15 millimeters of mercury. So it will not be a torrential flow. It will not be as turbulent as PD or something else. The case which I have heard was in a case of acute rheumatic fever with carditis. In acute rheumatic fever with carditis, I heard this thing. The patient had acute rheumatic fever, severe heart failure. This was a 5 years, I think it was a 10-year-old boy. And that was the situation where I heard this mechanism. This is the camero-cameral from one chamber to the other chamber. That's all I can discuss about the continuous murmur. Taking each case we can discuss, but then it is basically discussion of the primary disease. And because I thought the postgraduates there, I thought of asking some questions on which I have taken the collaterals in coarctation of aorta, because the first class was on coarctation. I thought whether how much the teaching was effective. If the student is answering fairly weak on average, say if he answers something like to score 50 marks on that question, I will be happy. If that answer is less than 50, then I will say that I have to learn a little more and I have to learn the art of teaching once more or a little more. So that's why I thought of taking this. I think I have not taken 1 hour because stretching too much may be quite boring. Am I right, Dr. Mohit, Sumad and Girish? Stretching too much on this thing could be quite boring. If it's a post, then we can ask questions on questions.
It was a fantastic talk. So I didn't actually anticipate students would have been more than happy to join. So only, in fact, I only said that today was a didactic lecture. So otherwise they would have been very happy to join. And coarctation was a beautiful way. You see, it is not just important that the material and the matter that you give, the way you put it and the perspective with which you tell it just goes and registers into the mind. And that is what is the beauty. The way, you know, you're like if I am your student, which I am actually, you are such a senior person. So the way you so beautifully explained that how anti-intercostal arteries are coming, they are dilated, they are high pressure circulations. Posterior intercostal arteries are low pressure except the first and the second, which are rising from the costocervical tunnel. And because the descending aorta is deficient for the blood, it is trying to pull the blood. So posterior intercostal artery running on the posterior lower surfaces of the rib also get dilated, and that is why how they are producing the coarctation. So all these things, they just go straight into the mind. And this is not my voice. Actually, I believe many of the residents and students would also be resonating. Dr. Sumodh is nodding with me, and my colleague Girish is there. So this is the beauty of teaching, and that is why your presence here itself is so beautiful. And even we had a lecture of continuous murmur that was exceptionally good, but we have got a very different kind of approach and the perspective that you have mentioned today. So it's a great learning for all of us. We would be very happy if you can speak out some more things which you have in your collection, and or what you think that it will be worthwhile for the students. It was our mistake not to call them. I should have asked you earlier.
I think basically my interaction with the postgraduates, they are happy with case discussions, and during case discussion teaching something which is important for them. Basically,
Yes.
I feel that in 1 hour lecture, didactic lecture on any topic, it is difficult for me to tolerate. But the students, it is extremely difficult because they think, what is the need for discussing hemodynamics? It's not applicable. Coarctation, these things are very difficult. These collaterals, it goes to our brain because we learned this thing. We had to learn at that time. So it may not be difficult for us. The continuous murmur I discussed, nobody is going to ask. This is what I have formulated based on my basic clinical knowledge plus hemodynamics, which I have been doing over years. But it is not needed for them this much. I am sure that, and I would like to your contribution to continuous murmur, your experience also. Especially, I was still not convinced why the PDA murmur peaks around the second sound. That's the reason I tried to find out why this thing. Then the only thing is, the pressure gradient is not different, but I think the flow may be different, because the flow is dependent not only on the real pressure, it is dependent on the resistance also. So towards the end of systole, this is my thinking, and not anything which I have read, because during the rapid ejection, the high velocity flow occurs. But when the ejection comes down, the resistance in the aorta is higher, whereas the pulmonary artery resistance is low. That kinetic energy is not there now. So probably the flow may be more because of this, and the pressure may not be that different. This is the only thing which I thought. If you have something of your own, or you have read something, or you learned from your colleagues, you can contribute. I could not find an answer for that. The second was how often you have done Muller's maneuver. We asked the students how often we do Valsalva, how often we do. During a postgraduate examination, we are forced to do Valsalva. Okay, but I used to ask them, what is the situation where Valsalva is very important nowadays? If they answer that is during contrast echo, to pick up a pulmonary fistula or a right to left shunt, especially PFO in a cryptogenic stroke, then I think I'll be happy with that.
But sir, the contribution of Valsalva is much more than Muller's. Probably this helps in differential diagnosis of HOCM.
Yeah.
Whereas all the other situations which you, which is helpful with the Muller's maneuver, I think we don't do it so often as what Valsalva is. And
so
most
often.
of the textbooks also you would have seen that they tell you about all the 4 stages of Valsalva.
Yeah.
But they rarely tell about Muller's. They just say it's the opposite of Valsalva.
That's all. That's all what is needed, because I have done Valsalva only for my DM exam. And never after that. But it is difficult to train them. Muller's Valsalva, at least you can use the cannula, this thing, everything, and ask them to forcefully expire. But Muller's, it is difficult to train. Second, the clinical situation, I don't know whether I have seen pulmonary fistulas diagnosed by clinical auscultation. And the murmur of pulmonary fistula, I probably during my training in PG, I have seen one case. That is all. So that is, the application is less. Regarding hypertrophic cardiomyopathy also, what I found is recently we had with my juniors, we are trying to do that Valsalva, but the simple thing which we thought was a supine and standing, or squatting and standing is enough, because the other thing, when the person is doing Valsalva, to get good echo is difficult. Because they are straining, the transducer, it is not steady. So we have tried both, but supine and standing, always I make them do, and it is relatively simple. The gradient, yesterday also I had a case where supine it was 90, on standing it was 160. We had an interesting case of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. That was not a diagnosis. The patient presented with exertional syncope, 2 episodes. While he was walking, he was having graying ambition and 1 real syncope. Second, also another episode. Third, pre-syncope. All the 3 occurred usually by around 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. And what happens is when he develops syncope on walking, he's walking to his house, he speeds up to reach the house. And that situation fell. He was evaluated by my colleagues in this area. ECG normal, X-ray normal, echo near normal. Everything absolutely normal. Okay, so treadmill done. Treadmill also, he did not have symptoms and nothing contributory. So he was advised this ambulatory monitoring. And this patient's wife is my patient, an interesting case. So she has been my patient for the last 22 years. So he called me. I said, that's what we have to do. But I asked him to come to my OP so that I can have discussion with my colleagues. So I discussed with my colleagues. We said that the first thing is hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, but the competent person have done that. And we did echo. Because of this different diagnosis strong in our mind, we looked into it. It was an asymmetric, sigmoid septum. There was mild thickening of the LV outflow tract. No SAM, no gradients across the LVOT, nothing else. But I was reading the types of septum, that is Said's classification of septum, not the Maron's classification, that is the sigmoid septum, the reverse septum, the flat septum, and the thing. So that will cross my mind. I said that this looks like that, so why can't we try? Supine no gradient, on standing up 60 millimeters gradient. Then going back to the history, all these episodes occurred before lunch when the fluid intake, the preload was less. All occurred while he was walking in day sunlight, vasodilatation. So the afterload was less, the preload was less, the contractility was more because he was exercising and was augmenting the exercise. That is one of the experience which we had doing this standing exercise. You may have enough experience better than this also. Okay.
I find clinical examination, the change of position as a good way of making out the murmur of HOCM rather than Valsalva.
Yeah.
Because that is much more easy to do and easy to perform, and compared to Valsalva. Because Valsalva, I don't think someone can. I don't think you can mimic the experimental lab status in OPDs. So, but whereas squatting and standing is very easy. That's what I usually do in my OPs.
When we concentrate this in the examination when we are students, but we know that we have already a case of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. We get the tip. All of us get the tip for MBBS, MD, and DM. Okay. So we know that's a case, but we have to intelligently use that tip. So we know that, and these are things which you have to do. So we make them perform Valsalva with great difficulty. Probably we may be doing Valsalva rather than the patient, and we present the whole data. And we'll be screwed on the examiner interested in asking on Valsalva rather than on that patient, and we'll be in trouble. Okay. Probably that may be your experience also in your exam.
Any comments, Dr. Sumant? Anything else?
Yeah, sir. Another beautiful lecture, sir. Thank you for that very lucid lecture. One of the challenges when we examine a patient of continuous murmur, like especially the most common case that is kept is RSOB, because the murmur is so loud to see for the second sound, to comment about the second sound becomes difficult. To comment about the flow murmurs or even S3 can become difficult. Additional VST. So any tips and tricks to look for the additional, beyond RSOB, how can we say anything further than that? Any tips?
I think that's a point which I highlighted in my last comment, that RSOB, the murmur is so loud that you cannot pick up additional VSD murmur and AR murmur. Second, even in color Doppler also, that whole area is occupied by the RSOB. So it is difficult. But what I want examiner, the student to tell, Continuous murmur is easy because you can't hear the second sound, but the students will say, confidently say, the second sound is normally split loud P2, all those things. You can't hear the second sound. But how to say continuous is, I ask them to palpate the apex or palpate the carotid. Make sure that it is not interrupted with the carotid. That's the only thing which I do, and that's the only thing which is possible if the murmur is, because the murmur is so loud. Regarding the other findings, if it is very unlikely that you will have a large RSOV with a large VSD. The VSD is usually small, and that is why it is missed. Even in angiogram, it is missed. So the VSD is relatively small. So, and AR also, usually it is relatively mild, unless it is a non-ruptured RSOV or aneurysm, which has been aneurysmally bulging like that, and lifting up the right coronary cusp, producing severe AR. Because we have seen severe AR with aneurysm of sinus of Valsalva, which is not ruptured. So that ruptures. Then the presentation is, you have to ask. The question which I ask is, the RSOA presentation, what is in their mind is acute rupture presenting with acute heart failure. When the usual question which I ask is acute heart failure with runoff. Okay, suppose a patient has aortic runoff and a patient present with acute heart failure, we think about acute aortic regurgitation, acute RSOV. But in acute RSOV, if it is acute per se, then the cardiomegaly will not be there. If there is aortic runoff, you have diagnosed, the patient has come with acute heart failure, you have diagnosed RSOV, but there is a good aortic runoff, there is a large left ventricle, that means I say that it is acute on chronic AR, acute on chronic aortic runoff. There are two possibilities I teach them. There was a chronic RSOV which has worsened because of some factors, or there was an RSOV with a chronic severe AR. The RSOV is the new one. This is the way I discuss with them. That's all. I think you can also contribute.
Sir, what is the type of murmur? Actually, we often hear that the peripheral PS also has a continuous sort of murmur.
To be very frank, the case which I have seen, peripheral murmur, continuous murmur, was again during my DM training, where it was peripheral pulmonary stenosis with absent pulmonary valve and tetralogy of Fallot. That was the situation.
Oh.
So there were multiple factors. Because of the absent pulmonary valve, the pulmonary flow was not that bad, because the regurgitant volume was going, TOF, all those things. That was the situation where I heard a continuous murmur in pulmonary arterial stenosis. One case where I thought I have heard, or I think was an ASD, where I diagnosed ASD with pulmonary arterial stenosis, but we could not prove that. Because at that time ASD is the major event, and we closed this, and I could not get the patient for follow-up. And later when I got the patient for follow-up, I could not hear the murmur. So it could be simply because of the large flow. A torrential flow through the pulmonary artery per se can produce a faint continuous murmur. So those are all very rare things. We had enough discussion.
The continuous murmur with the diastolic combination, we told RSOV to RVOT and LAD narrowing. What about coronary AV fistula? We expect that because I know coronary flows are more in diastole. Will coronary AV fistula's murmur will be more augmented in diastole?
I think you're right, but I look at this thing in the right coronary circulation, that flow to the right atrium, right ventricle, flow to the right atrium, and it comes through the right atrial branches, all those things. It may be systolic and diastolic. The subendocardial flow to the left ventricle is mainly in diastolic. I think that may be the way I can explain that. That is, when we talk about the diastolic flow, we say predominantly, we mean it is, that's why LV angina is more common than RV angina. Exertional angina is more when the left ventricle is affected. Whenever we do angiogram for chronic stable angina or ischemic heart disease, we always concentrate on the left ventricular branches, PDA, PLB, all those things. The right ventricular branches contributing to the disease seldom we see. It may be there. So if you take coronary artery fistula to the right atrium, that's a commonest among these things. So the coronary artery, the pressure is 120/80, and it goes through the right atrial branches. And if it goes to the right atrium, I think the right atrial pressure is same. There is nothing to excuse that in systole. So it depends on the anatomical course of that arteriovenous fistula. I think you may be able to contribute. This is only my, just because you asked that question, I was trying to extrapolate the answer rather than a homework which I have done. I think if you have your explanation, otherwise something which is useful for us, it's a mutual learning.
Anything else, Dr. Sambhav?
Okay.
There was a question about eddy sounds. I think it is the currents that is colliding with each other. There's a question from Dr. Shabari who is asking the mechanism of eddy sounds. That's what was asked. In PDA murmur, they say eddy sounds is a
Now that also we have to go back to the history of clinical medicine rather than the newer thing. There is nothing new in that. Then all hypothesis. It was seen better. It was more prominent when the shunt is large. So that is a situation when there is no significant pH. So it is unlikely that it will be large diameter ductus. So it is described that it is seen when the diameter, or it is a relatively narrow, long tortuous ductus. It was the vibrations or the movement of the ductus as such which is contributed. There was one explanation which I read quite early. Second is this flow is coming and striking the pulmonary artery, and the turbulence, not only by this thing, that vibration of the arterial system may be contributing. The ductus plus the pulmonary artery, the proximal pulmonary artery LPA branch, that may be contributing. Otherwise, it is only the turbulence, and the clicks may be because of this. That was the most acceptable thing as far as I am concerned. That is better seen. Seldom you hear it in PDA with pH. Whatever you are seeing continuous murmur is a PDA, either a small PDA or a moderate PDA without pH. When there is significant pH, the murmur will not be that classical continuous, that character. It becomes soft, that machinery quality comes down, and obviously it gets shortened also. So whatever we have seen as the classical large, the continuous murmur is in children with a medium or a small to moderate side PDA without pH. So the ductus is likely to be long because the pulmonary artery is not dilated, aorta is not dilated. The ductus may be long and probably tortuous. So that movement may be contributing. This is what I read in 80s. And regarding the hemodynamic, that vibration of the vascular system of the ductus as well as the pulmonary artery, that's all what I think you can also contribute if you have something in your mind.
Sir, one last question. Why only the right and non-coronary sinus structure? Why not left coronary sinus? Very uncommon.
Okay. Okay, you have to corner me somewhere. Where is it? Okay. If you look at the size, I know right coronary sinus is larger. Second, the right coronary sinus is lower. Okay. Now, this is I am telling from my this thing. If you look at why right atrium is likely to enlarge more than the left atrium, because the space constraint for the left coronary sinus, left coronary sinus, posteriorly, it's a posterior left. Posterior, the space is not there. You have the left atrium, left ventricle, which is producing this is all my hypothesis, which comes just now. I have not read it. You cannot quote this, but I was thinking, because you look at the right atrium, there is enough space for it to enlarge towards the right. Okay, the pressure is the right-sided pressure, the right ventricular and the pulmonary artery pressures. Where on the left side, space constraint, you know that the left atrium is less compliant compared to the right atrium. The left ventricle high pressure producing the annular movements. Don't quote this. Okay, you can also hypothesize. If you have real knowledge answer, you can. Otherwise, you cannot. No, that's the way I have been learning, and I have been. I tell the students now, if you get a question, first, is the question familiar or not? Okay, this is not a familiar question. So I tell them that you should be careful in answering. If the question is unfamiliar, is the topic familiar? This topic is also not that familiar to me, but I know a little bit of physiology and anatomy. If the topic is familiar, I say that you deduct the answer, you may get the answer, you get score marks. Question unfamiliar. Question familiar, you have to answer. Question unfamiliar, you know the basics, try to answer. Question unfamiliar, You are not at all familiar in that. Don't open your mouth. It will be a blunder. I don't know at what grade, whether it is second or third, what I have done now. Definitely not first. It is an unfamiliar question. Is the topic familiar? Somewhat I can. So I thought because only 3 of us and not examination, I thought I will open my mouth.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you
Okay.
so much for this fantastic lecture. Thank you, Sumo. Thank you, Dr. Girish. And thank you, Intas, for providing us this platform. And as I said, that next time we'll be starting with the clinical discussions
That will be
with you
better for the
all.
postgraduate.
Yeah, and that will be great that you can present each case
pleasure.
one by one. Yeah.
It's a pleasure for me to discuss clinical case.
Yes, we'll be having you definitely next time, and I request all of you to please join. So it would be great that if we have some panelists also, panel also.
You coordinate the whole thing. You coordinate the whole thing. Okay. Probably next time I need not be included because continuous 3 weeks it is not fair.
Okay, next time. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And we'll catch up next Thursday, same time with a different topic, different clinical case discussion. And till then, stay safe and have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.